But it's like that whole you don't know what you don't know thing, right?
Correct.
Like you
That's
think
right.
like your ideas are brilliant. So you're kind of overconfident, but you're not understanding why they're not seeing the brilliance, right?
Yes.
So it's interesting. So you either lose your confidence because you're like, oh, nothing I do is ever good enough. They're always telling me, I have to redo it or whatever. Or you're like holding so strongly to your confidence and thinking like they're the problem. And then feeling bitter. And then we get into that whole burnout piece where people feel really resentful. Like,
exactly.
It's like, I can't win.
Correct. Exactly. But, you can turn it around in ways that are quite lovely. And one of the things that I really love about what I do is seeing the personal transformation in people. And I see it almost in their posture. And one of my favorite examples fairly early on when I was doing this work was when I was working with a law firm, and we'd been doing a big program. So this particular day I had like a dozen very senior partners in a room. It was just coincidence that they were all very senior. And the finance team had said to us, look, if anybody doesn't show up, tell us and we'll just grab someone and bring them in because we want this training, but we're not in the budget. So, just tell me, text me and I will find a person and sit them in the room and they can have the day. So I did that. And this girl came in and she sat down really meekly. She was mid-level finance person. And I think I'm guessing sort of mid to late 30s. I don't really know. And anyway, very, very quiet for the whole day. And then we came back a few weeks later because we'd done the training. And then the idea is you use the ideas and then you come back and debrief and practice and take it further. And so we went around the room and asked how everybody was going. And some people were going, oh, yes, I've done these things. That's great. Others were, oh, being a bit busy. Sorry, I haven't done very much. And then we came to this lady, her name was Tracy. And she sort of said, look, I just felt so fortunate to be here. And I don't do big things like you do. I don't do big letters of advice and so on. But I send a lot of emails. So I thought I'd focus on those. And they just sort of went, oh, yes, you do. And anyway, so the conversation went on and she said, well, previously, I spent a lot of my day chasing people, chasing you to get answers to what I think are fairly simple questions. And they looked and they just laughed and they said, yes. And look, we'd open them. And if we couldn't work it out within like 30 seconds, we'd park it for later. But we sort of wouldn't get to it because it just looked a bit hard.
Yeah.
And she goes, yeah, but you come back now. You do. Within a minute, you come back and say, yes, like this. You respond really quickly. And so that's sort of a really simple example of someone whose day, every day suddenly became like her posture changed. It was this palpable shift because she's like, now you come back to me, I can do my job. It was just all she did was take the idea that really mattered and bring it to the front and get rid of a lot of the clutter. They didn't need all the background. They just needed the main question or the main idea and a couple of supporting points, and that was it. And they're like, oh, I see it. Got it. Done. Yeah, we can do that.
Right. So I think that's actually really important. Yeah. I think what you're talking about is everybody's brain is a little bit different. And some people really like to dig and get all the juice and the information. They have to know all the details. And other people are like, just give it to me straight. I don't have time, as quickly as possible, get to the point. And so we have to kind of know our audience too, right? Like we have to know who we're writing to.
Yeah. And that comes a bit to my first one. I had it as my second myth, but we'll bring it to the first. How's that? Sure. Which is that leaving our idea to the end, our main thought to the end, giving everyone our background and our thinking rationale in a business context, giving all of that first before we get to the end, the big idea at the end is actually quite unhelpful. So even if you want to give people all the detail, which very often you do need to, it's not just want to, you need to, do it in a way that they can layer into it. So that you've got the big idea really, really early. And then you're visually formatting the information so it's easy for them to navigate. And if you've got to write a book, write a book. It's not always going to fit in 50 words on an email. Some emails have got to be 100, 200. That's fine. But make it really easy to navigate and bring the big idea to the front, not the back.
Well, I think this brings me back to the concept that we're taught when you're putting together a speech, which is tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them and tell them what you
told them. Tell them what you told them.
Right. So it's we want to say, hey, today I'm going to talk to you about X. So, upfront all the things. And then you're like, oh, well, what is that? Like, I want to know more. And then you're like, okay, here are all the details. And then you summarize it at the end and you're like, so just to recap, blah, blah, blah. Right. So I think it's a great idea to now implement it in other contexts like email, same idea. Right. And there's a reason why this works, right? Because as we're listening or as we're reading, we want to be able to just address everybody's needs. And this way, if you want the details, you go into part 2. If you just want the nitty gritty, you go to part 1. Right. Exactly. So it's like we can address different people's needs that way. That's cool.
Yep. Exactly.
Thank you. All right. So that's the first myth debunked, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to leave it to the end. And I think we see that a lot in sales pitches, actually. Right. Yes. It's like, let me tell you the story. This is how I started. And we do this a lot in like webinars and things like that. It's like you have all this like procrastination that happens of like, let me tell you all these different things. And then at the very end, we'll tie it back and we'll say, okay, this is what I'm selling. Right. And so that's actually super common.
And a really high risk strategy. Really high risk strategy.
Yeah, because people drop off.
Because absolutely. And I have clients tell me that actually. They say, I've got a team of marketing people that I do some work with, and they said that's exactly what they described. They said, we just find we lose people. They don't keep with all the little links that we've built into the story. That's a really natural flow. Yeah. But maybe they get distracted by a ping on their phone and they miss a few steps, or they just can't pay attention for that long, or whatever.
Yeah.
And we lose them. So what do? I said, well, how about we bring it up front? How about we really work out what we're trying to say and have a really short bit of background just to sort of allow their minds to settle into the story. And then here's the big idea. You've got to crystallize it though. It takes a bit of work. It puts all the work on the communicator, not on the audience.
Love it. So that's your first myth debunked. What is the second one?
Shorter is better.
Okay. Tell us about that.
Okay. So I think a lot of people tell their people, look, that's just too long. I haven't got time to read that. Cut it back to 2 pages. Cut it back to 6 pages. The Amazon method is the classic one where they say 6-page narrative. And so they put a box around it. And it's not wrong to do that. But I think the key issue is not so much the length. It's actually how fast it is to read, because everyone in business is busy. Everyone wants to see whether something's relevant really quickly, or to be able to get to the heart of it quickly. And so the issue is not the length of time, the number of words, the length in terms of number of words or pages. The issue, I think, to think about is how long does this take to read? And they're not always correlated. So I've got a number of examples where the before, if you like, is a page or a page and a little bit. And it takes such a long time to read because it's very difficult to navigate the way through. The ideas are not synthesized and tied together. And so the audience has to really, grab a cup of tea and sit back and just focus. Chocolate, coffee, maybe more effective than tea, something stronger, to really focus and work out what is going on here. It takes a long time. Whereas you rework it and it's 2 full pages, let's say, and you skim it in 30 seconds, you've got the idea, you know where to go to read what you want to read. So I think length on its own is the wrong metric. Yeah.
So when you talk about reworking it, an example of that might be maybe having bullet points or bold font, things like that make certain pieces of it stand out, kind of like we see with good copywriting.
Yes, although yes, and so yes, to have bold, absolutely, but not random bold. To have a very clear hierarchy of messaging so that you've thought about, what do we really want to get out of this piece? What's the key takeaway? What really is that single message that we want to convey as a single sentence? And have that bold, have it in the title of the document, maybe shortened a bit to be a bit like a newspaper headline version of it, but have that essence in the headline. Have your big message really clear, and then have a very clear hierarchy of your messaging and make the formatting match that hierarchy. So when you look at it, it becomes a bit like a picture, right? You can see the big things are more important. The still bold but slightly smaller things are important, but maybe a component of that section with a bigger sized font title. So you break it down visually with a hierarchy, as well as having a mental hierarchy that you match.
So it makes me think of when I'm doing the show notes for the podcast, we have the podcast heading, which gets you a sense of what the show is about. So you're like, that sounds interesting. I'd like to listen to that. And then in the show notes themselves, there's, these are the 3 myths we debunked. 1, 2, 3. And so you have an outline of what is going to be in the show. And then you're like, do I want to listen to that or not? And you make a decision, which is getting back to your original point, based on the clarity of that information and the organization of it.
Yes. The clarity and the quality. Yes. So it's clear. That's great. Now, does that look interesting to me? That's the quality piece. Yeah. Both of those things. Much easier to see if it's quality, if it's clear.
Okay. So this is all starting to kind of cement for me. So I love that this is happening. Okay. So we've had our 2 myths debunked. Tell us number 3.
Third one is that topics equal structure. So if we think of your podcast example, so if you were to say the topic for today was business communication skills. Okay. It's pretty general, but what are we saying about business communication skills? What's the message really? So it's very easy to have a structure that's laid out with, as I see a lot of people do, what we're doing, when we'll do it, why we'll do it. Those sorts of titles, that's not a helpful structure. All that does is collect information. Business templates often do that too, because leaders want you to make sure you've actually thought about something. So they'll give you a whole lot of topics and say, fill in this template, this business case template, so that, we know you've thought about the risks and the options and all these other sorts of things. And that's helpful. But what it doesn't do is crystallize, if you think business case, why we should invest $1 million in this new technology. You actually still have to read all the things to work that out. So thinking about what your messaging is, not just what you're going to talk about, is the shift.